And welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Peter Winick. I'm the founder and CEO of Thought Leadership Leverage, and you're joining us on our podcast today, Leveraging Thought Leadership. Today, my guest is a interesting fellow by the name of Matt Johnson. Matt, say hello.
Hey, how's it going, guys?
Hey, let me give you a bit of Matt's background. He is a podcast host. He is a production agency founder, and his business really focuses on helping experts, thought leaders, entrepreneurs, etc., break into new markets through podcasting. So it's a little bit meta that we've got a podcast about podcasting, but I think we've hit saturation in the podcast world if that's the case. But what I thought, I came across Matt a couple of weeks ago, and we've had a couple of really, really wonderful conversations, and he's a smart guy, and I'm relatively new to podcasting. It's probably about 6 months or so since we launched the show, and it's doing some great things for us. But I really wanted to understand from someone that's got deeper expertise in this modality than I do, sort of the good, the bad, the ugly. So why don't we start with Matt? Why someone would launch a podcast and how to set some goals and sort of walk us through that process.
Well, cool. Well, let me start a little bit with kind of where I'm coming from, so people understand my perspective, because I'm on the same journey. The reason I got into podcasting in my corner of the world in real estate was I had a friend of mine essentially pitch me on the idea, and the idea was to promote his coaching, and that we would eventually partner up on a coaching business, which we now run. So that's the reason why I got into podcasting to begin with, was to start that journey of kind of being a thought leader myself. And I mean, it completely changed my life. I mean, I can't put it any milder than that.
So I didn't know that. Let me ask you a question on that, because most of the clients that I work with, podcasting is, I don't want to say an afterthought, but they've already done A, B, and C. They've already written a book.
Yeah.
They already speak. They already consult. This was your first entree into thought leadership. I did not know that.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So my first book will come out later this year, and I think actually that's a pretty good progression of the way to do it. I have a client who wrote her book first, then started a podcast, and she agreed she probably would have done it the other way around. But I don't think it's hard to say there's a wrong way to do it, because either way, at some point you need your own platform, your own media platform, and you need your own book. They all kind of feed into each other, and so I think it's whatever you can get done first, do it first. But yeah, I came to it from podcasting first. And for a long time, that was really my only credibility indicator. So all the speaking engagements, everything that we did, all the people that we attracted into our world, the audience that we built, literally everything came off of the podcast itself.
Well, let me just add a thought to that, Matt, if I could, is that I love that, because I've seen a lot of people sort of either start off or far too early in their progression as an author or I shouldn't say author, as a thought leader, start with a book. A book is fixed, right? So a book is going to take you, 6 months of your life. Once it's done, it's done. And then you get it out there and it's a lot of work. And then oftentimes you learn after the fact, wow, if I only knew then what I knew now, right? In terms of response that you got from the market, et cetera. I look at podcasting as a really inexpensive and effective way to test, right? You can put different concepts out there and go, I thought that was brilliant, except nobody listened, right? And then you put something else out there and go, yeah, that didn't sound like anything that would be valuable. And that's the thing that takes off. So using it as a way to gather market intelligence, so that by the time you get to a book, done some R&D, if you will. Do you agree?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, more than 100% agree, which is exactly why I dropped the UX podcast this summer, knowing the UX book wouldn't hit until later this year, for exactly that reason. And not only that, not only hosting my own podcast, but also actively going out and pitching myself on other podcasts. Now, I'm thankful that I wrote the bulk of the book before going out and pitching myself as a guest, because it did help me to refine the things that I want to talk about. Sure. And know exactly what I'm going to eventually sell people. And I'll get to that in a second. But yes, the idea that you have to wait until you have the book. I think the trap of writing a book, if you can call it that, is it goes back to the 80-20 rule, right? So creating content should be about 20% of the overall effort it actually takes to make it a success, because 80% of the work is actually in marketing the thing, not in creating the thing. Always. And I can tell you, like, even my own mentor, my own business coach, kind of fell into that trap a little bit of writing a book and just expending so much emotional, physical, and mental energy on the book that just did not have enough left over for the marketing. And I think to me, that is the trap, is just putting so much of our heart and soul into the content of the book. And then we build up expectations about how amazing the content is. And the problem is, the marketing content that sells the book has to be just as amazing. The marketing strategy of how the book is
Yeah,
marketed
totally.
has to be amazing in order for it to actually sell. To me, that's where a podcast comes in, to where if you've had a podcast for 2 years and you've been field testing the things you have to talk about, you know what resonates, you know what gets people's attention, you know what the headlines are, you know what the attention grabbers are. Then when you come along with a book, you can already leverage all that information. It shapes the content of the book, but more importantly, it shapes the marketing strategy behind the book that will actually work.
Totally. I love that. So let's talk about a couple of different sort of levels in podcasting. So first let's talk about, because your business is interesting, where you're both helping people, produce and such on their podcast, as well as finding guests for them and all that. So let's talk about sort of both ends of the spectrum. One, the power of being a guest on a podcast, and then number two, ultimately developing and hosting your own as it relates to sort of your business and your thought leadership. So I want to maybe start with guesting and the power and the benefits of that.
Yeah, and that's exactly the place that I recommend people start first, because it does help you refine your message. It's completely scalable, both up and down. You can pitch yourself on as many as you want. You can completely turn off the spigot if you get tired of it, if your business gets busy, whatever the case is. However, there comes a time when you realize that being a guest on other people's podcasts, while it exposes you to new audience and has all kinds of benefits that we all know about, and it helps sell books and all that good stuff, at some point you realize that your message is being shaped and influenced by the host
Sure.
before it gets to your audience. And at some point, you always want to have that place where people can come back to, where you have 100% control of the message, whether you interview people or on your podcast or not. We encourage all of our clients to do that. But at some point, like even if you have people come in and you're interviewing them, you always want to have a place where you have absolute control of the message. And because if you're selling coaching, consulting, speaking, like anything that's like we're selling our expertise, right? We have to demonstrate that we have something to say that's extremely different and unique from anybody else. So just being on other people's platforms, or even just spotlighting other people on our own podcast, keeps other people from seeing our unique expertise. So we always need to make sure that we have a place where we control the message, we can deliver the message that we have to say to our audience, and make sure that our content is separate and above
Right.
anything else.
And as a guest, right, the format and the structure are not yours. So you have to fit, you wouldn't go to someone's home and say, oh, the dining room table would look better over here, and I think I'd move the master, right? That's just not done. Well,
Yeah.
would be, but you probably wouldn't get invited back. But so as a guest,
Yeah, it depends on what state you're in. Maybe in New York. I've got a buddy in New York. He would absolutely do that, but not anywhere else.
yeah. So as a guest, you sort of have to fit into that. Now, the other side is the benefit of being a guest is the ability to expose yourself to an audience that's not yours. And then some subset of that audience says, wow, that guest was brilliant. Let me go find their book or go to their site or whatever. And I would also imagine you would say it's not binary. You don't one day wake up and say, I will no longer be a guest. I'm only going to be a host, because here you are, right? What's the mix that's right? Is there a mix, or how does that work?
Yeah, I think as we get better at systematizing the business, especially if we're putting our expertise into things like courses and programs and things like that are more leveraged, that don't require our time. It's not high level brain surgery consulting, right? So the more that we leverage ourselves, I think our focus shifts from the doing of the thing to the marketing of the thing, which is exactly what should happen. We know that from, all the way going back to Michael Gerber and the E-Myth. We know that that's the progression. We lose sight of that a lot of times, especially in consulting. Coaching is a little bit more easier, because there's a path laid out from individual one-on-one to group coaching. Everybody kind of understands that, is looking to that as a goal. But man, consulting and speaking, really hard to get trapped in that one-to-one or one-to-many where you're doing all the work. But as we let go of that, and as we build things where we go from kind of what I would call a high touch to a low touch kind of delivery of our expertise, our job shifts to marketing the thing. And so in terms of the ideal mix, I think it really depends on just what our time is. And as our time frees up, I think my priority is to be on, let's say at least 2 podcasts a week, and then to deliver about 2 podcasts a week to my audience. And I think that can fluctuate, but a good 50-50, or maybe even leaning heavily towards maybe a 2-to-1 ratio of being a guest versus doing your own, just to make sure that we're staying in front of new audiences. So that's a good mix.
So let's talk about, I don't even know what the numbers are, but there are zillions, that's a technical term, of podcasts out there. You've allocated, because your time's valuable. You said, I'm going to do 2 a week. What are the select criteria that you have around the 2 that you've got, both from a content standpoint and an audience size standpoint? What are the things that you look for, and what would you definitely say yes to and definitely say no to?
Well, for the most part, what I'm looking for is two things. So the connection with the host. I'm very aware of who the host is. And so if I want to connect with the host, I don't care about the audience because the host themselves is valuable enough. So that's number one.
So wait, but I want to unpack that because that's a brilliant gem. It might be that the host is someone that the only way you'd get 20 minutes with them or whatever is to be on their podcast,
Exactly.
right? So
Yeah.
they're okay.
Yeah.
So
So
that's
a
cool.
quick example of that is we just booked here about a month ago for a client whose podcast is not even launched yet. We reached out to Grant Cardone, and Grant Cardone gives an immediate yes. Yes, I'll be on that podcast. The podcast is not launched yet. Now, you think Grant Cardone doesn't care about how big of an audience he's reaching? You better believe he cares. The reason why he didn't care in this case is because the client was somebody that as soon as he's seen the name, he's like, okay, that's somebody I want to connect to because it connects with his life goals of building wealth through real estate investment.
Got it.
And
Got it.
yeah, so that's the circumstance that I'm speaking of there is that sometimes the host is just that powerhouse of a person. And you're absolutely
Nice.
right. That may be the only way to get 20 minutes with them. Beyond that, so beyond the relationship with the host, then I'll look at does the audience reach people that are in, one or two of my client avatars, or can I spin the content? Does the content make me look credible? And when I send it out to my client avatars on my side, that it makes me look better and says something about me and my expertise. So even if they don't have a huge audience on their side, if I feel like the net of me going on to the show is it boosts my credibility, even if I just send it back, publicize it on my side to my audience, to me that's a good thing, and it's typically worth 20 or 25 minutes on my calendar.
Sure. Okay, so that's good. I find it really interesting. I get pitched a lot, and I'm not a big deal by any stretch, from various agencies on behalf of people. And what I find funny is they have no idea. Like we're on a list somewhere, and they're not talking to anybody. I've got pitched by talk to so and so who's an expert in blockchain, or so and so that's the biggest person in the tile distribution industry. And my first thought is, they even have any idea who, like, why would I do that, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure they're lovely people, but there's a bit of laziness out there, I
Yeah,
think,
totally.
in many instances. So you're in the business, or part of your business is actually finding great guests for some of your clients that have podcasts. So how do you go about sort of the pitching on that so that you're relevant, and you're because your clients wouldn't want to pay you to talk to people that are outside of their domain expertise?
Yeah, 100%. So yeah, so the process is number one, when we take on a new client, we work with them to figure out who are the two ideal 2 to 3 guest avatars, right, for their ideal guest. So we know kind of who that is going in. Then we're going to build a list of at least 100 people starting out, so that we're pitching the right person. And for some of our clients, we get even more involved, where one of my clients and I actually share a Trello board where we pitch each other ideas on guests.
Oh,
And
nice.
so yeah, so some clients want to be really involved, some are more hands off, and they trust us over time to book the right people. The biggest hurdle, I would say the only hurdle really, where we have trouble with clients and getting it right, is when they aren't clear on who exactly they want to interview and they can't nail it down to an avatar. And then it's like, well, I want to interview somebody that's has this amazing personality trait. I'm like, no, that doesn't, like, we industry
Give me
expertise
charisma.
level. So yeah, exactly. Yeah, give me charisma.
Right.
Or someone who's had a heart-centered, soul-centered turnaround. And yeah, I mean, like the intangibles are hard.
Right.
The tangible stuff, that's easy. So, but on the guest booking side, man, that it's absolutely true. One of the quickest ways to kind of damage your reputation as an expert, as a thought leader, is to have somebody reach out on your behalf who isn't doing any homework and leaves that host or that event planner or whatever with a bad impression of you because that person you hired to pitch you didn't do their homework.
Yeah, and I mean, there's an element of laziness there, obviously. So
100%.
great, that was helpful. Let me start to move directionally into what I believe the two ultimate primary benefits of podcasting could be. Right. So there's, and I would call, we could debate the names, which is cool. There's sort of a branding awareness piece to it, and then ultimately there should be a transactional piece to it. And what I mean by transactional is not that somebody's going to pay for your podcast, but using it as a way to attract net new clients, right? So people either hear your podcast or they're a guest on your podcast, whatever it is, and they go, wow, I want to spend more time with that person and hire them to help me do A, B, and C. So tell me about sort of expectations and the continuum of brand to ultimately finding clients through a podcast and what your experience has been.
Well, so to me, the podcast and the way that it fits into the mix of things, and you talk about branding and awareness, I would throw the additional word in there of positioning.
Okay.
And really, so the podcast ideally, and the reason we spend time, especially in the first couple of weeks with a new client, really zeroing in the branding, is to figure out how are we positioning them in the market, because the podcast, just by saying you're the host of XYZ podcast, should instantly position you. And for example, you did a great job with yours
Thank you.
of leveraging thought leadership, right? It immediately speaks to not only what you do, but what you're expert at. And just somebody saying your name and the host of leveraging thought leadership, somebody saying like Greg McDaniel's the host of Real Estate Uncensored, which is a good buddy of mine, it immediately positions them a certain way.
Well, similar to the author of the book, not quite, but there's a similar gravitas or credibility of, so and so wrote the book on, so and so is the host of the podcast on. It gives a sense of, credibility and expertise.
Yeah, and credibility is definitely a part of it. I think where it really helps people for the public and how it directly translates into clients is it tells them instantly, what mental bucket do I put this person in? Which is something a lot of experts have a really hard time at. And again, it goes back to that. If the thought leader is unclear about where they want to sit in the mind of their ideal client, that will cause all sorts of other issues. But if you're clear about it and you translate that into the way that the podcast is branded, it will instantly speak to the right client and tell them what mental bucket to put you in. And ideally, it's a category that you can own and dominate, a niche within an existing category. So there's a whole lot there. We could go way deep down the rabbit hole on that, but we won't. I do want to get to the second thing though. So Tim Ferriss said something really, really good a few years ago that blew me away, and I think is absolutely true, specifically to podcasting. He said, look, I only do two things. Everything is free except for what's ultra premium. So for anyone who's a thought leader, to me, that's the best mix. The only reason to have mid or low priced anything is only, for the most part, to offset the cost of going out to the wider world and growing your audience through ads, and then having them buy products and courses to offset those ads to grow the audience. Where I see most people making the profit is in their highest ticket thing. So if you look at the business models of the digital marketer of the world, even the guys that are on the behind the scenes, the Perry Belchers, the Frank Kerns, all those guys, like they make the most money on the high ticket stuff that they offer at the very end of the funnel, and everything else that we see on the outside. I mean, this is a very, very hard thing for a lot of people to get, which is never, ever, ever, ever copy someone's business from the outside based on what they're doing that we can see, if we can't see their whole business model. Because a lot of times we're copying their loss leader. And then I literally just had a conversation with one of my really good friends who runs one of the biggest Facebook groups in real estate, and he's all fired up about doing like his own live event. And immediately you see the dollar signs of ticket prices times attendance equals profit. I'm like, no,
or
no,
loss.
wait a minute. Yes, exactly. I'm like, mostly loss. Here's how people make money at events. And so once you explain the business model and what people actually have to do that, you realize, oh, wait a minute, I probably shouldn't, unless I have the high ticket thing, I shouldn't go into that market. And so we never, ever want to copy we don't want to copy someone else's lead generator or loss leader thinking it's going to be our core offer, because that's a very, very fast way to lose a lot of money.
No, that's great. Touch a little bit on the metrics, right? So ultimately, if you look at a podcast, or it's got to fall on your budget somewhere, it's going to be somewhere between branding and marketing, right? How do you know when, what a good ROI is? I mean, obviously, from my experience, I'd love for you to sort of give some feedback on that. Patience is a virtue. So I learned a long time ago when I started blogging, a good friend of mine who was a pretty renowned blogger said, this will be tough and you will want to quit. Don't even think about quitting until you got 100 of them under your belt. And I'm like, okay. So then every time I got frustrated, I'd look up at the number count and go, okay, 63, there's nothing happening here. So, okay, remember what he said.
Yeah. And so here's the struggle. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with focusing on return on investment, ROI. Most people don't do enough of it. However, there is a subset of people, and maybe you find yourself in this group, where you focus on ROI sometimes to your own detriment, simply because the timeline, you don't know what the timeline is. So let me give you the timeline for podcasting. Podcasting is just like a real estate agent farming a neighborhood with postcards and drop-bys, like zero difference. You're taking a group of people, you're sending them content, you're building trust and relationships, and that only happens over time. So what is that? I think Jason Leitner said like trust equals promises kept over time, right? So when you deliver a podcast, any type of content, you are essentially promising your audience that you're going to do something. They're all sitting back and waiting to see if you're actually going to do it, because most people don't. So when you actually do it, you're fulfilling those promises and you're keeping those promises over time. That builds the trust. That it also demonstrates your expertise and has a lot of other benefits along the way. But the timeline is 12 to 18 months before you actually see like a flywheel kick in and you start to attract new people for free into your world by virtue of running the podcast. Same thing for Gary Vaynerchuk when nobody knew who he was running Wine Library TV. He said, look, I shouted into the void for 18 months. Most people don't have the patience to do it, but now we know what the timeline is. Like we know that's what it is. It's 12 to 18 months. But here's the good part. Going back to the relationship with the guests of your podcast, or if you're going on podcasts, the relationships that you build by running an industry podcast, whether you're a guest or your host, they're so amazing, so impactful, and they do bring in business. That's the business you actually bring in the short term, is you build up. So to me, the biggest value of running an industry podcast is to break into a new space or carve out a new space, build relationships with 24 of the most incredible thought leaders in that space, and then start nurturing those relationships for referrals.
And from my experience and my world with authors and thought leaders and such, it's better to do it in such a way where your business model is selling low quantity of high ticket items as opposed to high quantity of low ticket items, right? A podcast to sell
100%.
books probably isn't going to work, but consulting services, coaching services, all those sort of things. Well, this has been amazing.
Yeah, and that goes back to metrics too. Yeah, and yeah, because I know you got a hard out, but I wanted to point out the average podcast gets 200 downloads an episode, like way smaller than most people think. Here's the good news, though, is you don't need much more than that to build a legit 6 or 7 figure coaching consulting business. Look no further than my client, Jeff Cohn. I've got a whole case study of him on my website, pursuingresults.com. You can check out his story. He came out of nowhere, built the #1 team in his state, started going on podcasts, and we launched a podcast together. Flash forward 2.5 years. He dominates that space in the podcast space, and only gets 1,500 to 2,000 downloads per episode.
But they're the right 1,500
for his very first event. They're the exact right people. They're the ones that get on the plane, drop $3,000 to go to his workshop, and come to Omaha to fly to be at his event. And he can trace 70 to 80% of all of his income streams from the coaching, consulting, and speaking directly back to the podcast.
Awesome stuff. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for sharing lots of information, and we were really deep on podcasting today because I think it's a really important marketing tool and way to get content out into the world cost effectively. And I think it's just because it's relatively new, a lot of people struggle with it. So your expertise was really, really helpful, and I appreciate that today. Real quick, just how do people find you?
So to learn more about the service and what we do, just a complete zero hassle turnkey podcast production for high level experts, entrepreneurs, it's pursuingresults.com. If you're not quite ready for that step yet and you want to just pitch yourself and be a guest and kind of dip your toe into the waters that way, I've got a free gift for you that'll show you exactly how to hand all that over to an assistant with some email templates that they can send, as well as the research process we talked about, so that you don't have that effect of giving the impression that they are lazy in their reach out. That's all at pursuingresults.com/pitch.
Thanks so much. Well, thank you for that, and free gifts we love. So thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks, Matt.
That's right. Thanks for your time, Peter. Appreciate it.
To learn more about Thought Leadership Leverage, please visit our website at thoughtleadershipleverage.com. To reach me directly, feel free to email me at peter@thoughtleadershipleverage.com. And please subscribe to Leveraging Thought Leadership on iTunes or your favorite podcast app to get your weekly episode automatically.